All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Special Education Legal Fund's February webinar, Exploring Residential Special Education Schools. My name is Christine Lai, and I am the Executive Director and co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. I'm so pleased to welcome all of our panelists and guests for tonight's discussion. We are pleased to announce our sponsors for the 2021 webinar series: Winston Preparatory School, Chapelhaven Schliefer Center, and American School for the Deaf. Winston Preparatory School is an innovative private day school for students through 12th grade with learning differences such as dyslexia, nonverbal learning disabilities, and executive functioning difficulties. With schools in New York City, Connecticut, New Jersey, Long Island, Marin County, California, as well as transitions in New York City and Winston Online, our unique model of education for the individual provides intense skill remediation while encouraging students to build independence, resilience, responsibility, and self-advocacy. Founded in 1817, the American School for the Deaf, or ASD, was the first permanent school for the deaf in the United States. American School for the Deaf provides a culturally, linguistically, and sensory accessible environment ideal for deaf, hard of hearing, and hearing students with diverse communication needs. Chapelhaven Schliefer Center is a nationally accredited transitional living program and approved private special education school with a mission of empowering adults 18 and older with developmental and social disabilities to live independently and self-determined lives. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Just a little bit about Special Education Legal Fund for those of you who don't know us. Special Education Legal Fund, or SELF, was founded in 2018 to provide grants for families in need with children in the special education system. Since our founding almost 3 years ago, we have provided over $320,000 in grants for legal support from qualified special education attorneys to approximately 80 families in 30 school districts across Connecticut and Westchester County. For more information about grants or to begin the application process, please send me an email. It's listed right there. Families are eligible for our grants program if they have an adjusted gross income of below 300% of the federal minimum poverty line, a current IEP, and live in Connecticut or Westchester. We're accepting applications from families in all school districts in those areas. Our next deadline is Monday, February 15th, and the deadline after that is Monday, March 15th. This is the rest of the webinars for the year. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because all of you can register for the March, April, May, and June webinars in the same way that you signed up for this one. But our next webinar will be on March 10th, and it will be a panel of special education advocates. And here we are. I'd like to welcome Kristen Feldman to our panel. Representing the American School for the Deaf. Kristen is a longtime member of the American School for the Deaf's community. She holds a bachelor's in science degree from Gallaudet University and a master's from Bay Path University in clinical mental health counseling. Kristen began her career at ASD as a teacher's aide in 2005 before moving on to become a residential counselor. She became a crisis intervention specialist, supervising staff and students in their PACES program. She is currently the Director of Student Life, where she oversees the management of all residential services for both the core and PACES programs. She also manages transportation and athletics and is a proud member of the Deaf Olympics basketball team, where she's won several gold medals. Welcome, Kristen. Our next panelist is from Chapelhaven, Christy Chandler. Christy has worked in special education for over 15 years, including as a K-5 special education teacher, a full-time mentor for new K-5 teachers, and a special education teacher working with young adults in Chapelhaven's REACH program. Christy has served as Director of Admissions at Chapelhaven since 2015. Christy works with parents and professionals to navigate the admissions process for all of Chapelhaven's core residential programs, as well as day, vocational, and recreational opportunities. Finally, our last school panelist is Lauren Koffler from Shrub Oak International School. Lauren brings more than a decade of experience in education to her role as head of admissions and communication at Shrub Oak. Lauren began her career as a preschool teacher, but discovered that her true passion was working with students and their families and helping them navigate the challenges of the special education system. That sounds familiar. Prior to joining the Shrub Oak community, Lauren held positions working with students and their families at various schools, including Claremont Preparatory School and Williamsburg Northside School. A graduate of the University of Wisconsin at Madison, Lauren is currently pursuing a master's degree in social work from Fordham University. Next, I am delighted to introduce attorney Lawrence Berliner. Larry has been a valuable partner and supporter of Special Education Legal Fund since our very earliest days. We have been very blessed to forge a truly collaborative relationship over the past 3 years, and Larry is a compassionate and thoughtful voice for parents in the special education process. And finally, last but not least, the last member of our panel that I'm going to introduce is Paul Barger. Paul is a partner at Barger & Gaines in Westchester, New York, and practices special education law on behalf of families in New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Michigan. Paul has particularly extensive experience in residential school education placements and speaks nationally on this topic on a regular basis, or at least when we were able to speak nationally on a regular basis. We are very pleased to have Paul on this panel. I have to do this because, it's 2021. Here's our disclaimer for the evening. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participants on this panel or the organizations that they represent. For webinar participants, this panel should be viewed as a public forum. Please do not ask questions via the Zoom platform, either in the Q&A or the chat, about your child or your child's legal or educational situation. Please email questions to me at Christine@spedlegalfund.org, spedlegalfund.org. In your question, please refrain from any comments that include identifiable information about your child, including name, grade, school, age, or school district. Please remember that your screen name may be visible to me, to participants in the panel, the panelists, and Special Education Legal Fund. This webinar is being recorded and may be distributed or shown at a later date at the discretion of Special Education Legal Fund. Now, finally, I'd like to introduce our 3 school members of the panel so they can talk a little bit about the programs that they have at their organizations. So first up is American School for the Deaf. Kristen, would you like to start? Let me know when you want to switch the screen.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, and I'm Kristen Feldman. Thank you so much for introducing me. I'm so excited to be part of the panel this evening. Truly is an honor. And American School for the Deaf, as you had said, was established in 1817, the first deaf school in America. It was the first special ed school in the Eastern Hemisphere. We have a program, 2 programs, CORE and PACES. One focus on students who have emotional challenges in the classroom. That's our PACES program. And from there, we expanded to our autistic nonverbal program as well. We have a residential program for both the CORE and the PACES students. We're always meeting the individual students' needs. We provide activities after school, athletics, and services. The goal is always to meet the child's individual needs. I cannot tell you again how excited I am to be here this evening.
Oh, whoops, I forgot to switch screens. Sorry, this is the second slide. I'm so sorry about that. All right, next up is Chapelhaven. Christy, would you like to begin?
Well, thank you. So we are also delighted to be here today. So Chapelhaven has been nestled in New Haven since 1976 in our most recent Westville location there, but since 1972 originally, we started down on Chapel Street in New Haven, which was how our adults came to name us Chapelhaven. And we're probably pretty well known for our residential programs. I think what a lot of families don't realize about Chapelhaven is the breadth of options that are available there. We have day and a la carte and vocational and recreation. But very excited to be talking about our REACH residential program tonight. And Christine, if you want to switch slides, we'll show some of the faces of some of our lovely young adults there in the REACH program. So this program serves young adults who are 18 and older that have a range of mild developmental and intellectual disabilities. So some common diagnoses we might see are Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorders, sometimes traumatic brain injury, but all very, capable young adults in taking care of their day-to-day needs and very eager and motivated to start their journey towards independence. We have a really thriving community of graduates, and Christine, you can switch to the final slide, please. Really thriving community of graduates who continue to remain in the Westville area working and living and playing and, continuing to access Chapelhaven supports as needed, and definitely continuing to take part in that social network that's there. So we'll talk, in more depth as we go throughout, but the residential program at REACH is typically a 2-year program, although that can be flexible, and you can see some of the core components there. It really is all the nuts and bolts that you need to put together the skills and structures and routines for independent adult living. And just a note there at the bottom too, that we've got those ongoing supports for our graduates. Thank you.
And now Lauren.
Hi, so Shrub Oak International School is a therapeutic day and boarding school located in northern Westchester County in New York for students on the autism spectrum. So we accept complex students on the autism spectrum. We're located on 127 acres. And we have a wide variety of programs. So we can accommodate day students, 5-day room and board, 7-day room and board. And we have 2 distinct programs. The first being our core program, which is divided into 2 paths, college readiness and then meaningful employment. And the other is our founders program, which leads to meaningful life. Diagnoses must have an ASD diagnosis, but we also accommodate students with behaviors, dual diagnosis of ADHD, visual and hearing impairments, intellectual disabilities, medically fragile students as well. And, the biggest thing for us, what makes us unique, we are transdisciplinary and our staff and teams meet every single day, creating a highly individualized program for the students that come onto our campus.
Great. Wonderful. Let's just go back to perfect. All right. Thank you all. I guess I will start this off, this panel this evening. I speak to a lot of parents who have come to a crossroads between a therapeutic day program and a therapeutic residential program. And they approach the crossroads with a great deal of trepidation. So this question is really for everyone on the panel. Can you all speak to what a residential therapeutic program can mean for a student versus a similar day-only program? Christy, why don't you go first?
Okay, sure. So I do have to clarify that Chapelhaven's not considered technically a therapeutic program. So
right.
Just because we don't have those day-to-day clinical supports, but we do have speech language pathologists. We certainly work with OT if needed, and we have our special education teachers. But I think the thing that makes Chapelhaven such a fantastic place is it's not just learning in the classroom or learning in artificial settings or even learning in authentic settings, but only in very small confines. You are really living, breathing, and doing all day, every day, the things that you're going to be expected to do as an adult. And so you're out in the community doing your grocery shopping, you're at the bank, you're doing your budgeting. And it's not just about what's happening during the technical classroom time, but it's all that incidental learning that's happening in those teachable moments. I think also there's a real benefit in our students being able to practice in a place where there's that safety net, but without it being mom and dad that they're necessarily relying upon, because moms and dads love to do things that, you know, moms and dads do, like wake you up in the morning and make you a nice breakfast. And so they have to start, you know, fading back those loving mom and dad support so that they're taking on more ownership and responsibility to do those things independently. So I can continue to go on, but I want to pause and give other panelists the opportunity too. So you let me know how much or how little, Christine.
Sure, absolutely. How about Lauren, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I think that the benefits of a residential program versus a day program would really be the 24/7 care that the students receive by trained staff. You know, parents overall would, especially at least for our demographic, would receive more support from a residential program, and they have education, clinical, and campus life staff as support, and they would be working on their ADL skills during the day in their academic program during life skills-based classes. But also after school with campus life staff helping them complete their daily chores like cleaning their room and making their bed and hygiene, feeding. So, you know, it also allows students to, in our opinion, progress more quickly and to develop independence and friendship. But like Christy said, mom and dad, you know, we come in and mom and dad will make that, or they will make a really nice breakfast, and the kids are more responsible for that when they are living on campus, and that is a benefit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kristen, would you like to go next?
The benefits of therapeutic programs is, well, we have a 24-hour care that we provide. We teach these children how to live independently. So that when they graduate, some we know will transition into a group home, or we teach the ADLs to them. Community-based, we bring them out into the community and teach them how to use the transportation system. Not only that, we have a variety of activities, teaching them how to make sure that they are socializing, that they're able to access the language that they need. So we're seeing that really benefits our students from them being together and socializing with each other to understand language needs, etc.
Wonderful. Larry, would you like to speak about this, you know, about this kind of crossroads?
Certainly. First of all, thank you for having me and being part of this panel this evening. I come from a perspective as an attorney representing parents who are at this crossroads. And there's no one answer to the question, but it depends on the age of the child. Some parents are very concerned about sending, say, a middle school child off, you know, to a residential program, a school. Older students, maybe there's trepidation, but less so. It's a process of letting go. And you heard examples of developing independence, you know, instead of having mom make breakfast, you make your own breakfast, for example. And what ends up happening is parents come to a crossroads. It could be problems at home, could be problems at school, combination of both environments that lead the parents to a conclusion that some kind of residential setting, often a therapeutic setting, is what is necessary if we're going to break a cycle of behavior, or if we're going to promote independence rather than maintaining dependence. It's also trying to have parents see the value, and there is value of seeing of education after the traditional school day and what goes on in these programs. We heard examples about having opportunities to access the community, going shopping, going out into natural settings. So it really depends on what the parent is looking for, the age of the child. Are they dealing with a child with some significant behavioral issues that are beyond the control of the family or the school district or both? Are we dealing with an older student, maybe in the 18 to 21-year-old range, who should be working on independence? So it's not an easy decision for any parent, especially those that are dealing with their children who are presenting difficult and challenging behaviors. It's easier when we have a lot of time to plan and move forward than deal with this kind of decision in the midst of a crisis. So I see it in all, shapes and sizes. Parents have all the time in the world to plan. Parents who have to make a decision in 24 to 48 hours, and they make the best decision they can.
Wonderful. Thanks, Larry. Paul, would you like to weigh in with your thoughts about, how a parent should approach the differences between, an inclusive residential program versus not inclusive, I shouldn't use that word, a residential program versus a comparable day program?
So, I also obviously, first of all, thank you for having me part of this great panel. I really appreciate it. And I also come at this from the perspective of an attorney. So I think it's important to for families to be mindful of working with their district on it, working with their district before making a decision, and then also working with experts and consultants. I think it's one thing that I've seen as I've done many residential cases. There's a large community of support. There's a large community of people that are there to help. There are consultants. There are evaluators doing neuropsychological evaluations. There's psychiatrists, and then there's the schools. The schools that and they do such great outreach that if a family's having difficult, and there's lawyers like us that do this, that are part of that team. And I think families, when they're making that, as Larry said, that the difficult decision and of whether or not to move forward with a residential program or a day program, keep in mind there are a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of people that can help with that decision and can explain the benefits of going to a residential program and having that comprehensive program 24 hours a day. And so as difficult a decision is, it's important for families to know that they're not in it alone, and there's a lot of people that are available to help them.
Wonderful. Thank you all for for your careful consideration answer of that question. Another question that I hear from parents has to do with trust. How do you as a parent, whether you are the parent, of an 18-year-old who's entering the REACH program, or the parent of a 12-year-old who's nonverbal and on the autism spectrum and entering ASD's program, or a child on the spectrum that's entering Shrub Oak, how do you as a parent get comfortable with the school, the oversight, the educational piece, and how you're going to communicate with your student in the school? That's kind of my question. Lauren, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'll speak for Shrub Oak, of course. So we understand how difficult it can be to place a child in residential care, no matter what age, because they are your child. And the parents are not going to have access to their children in person every day, and that's very difficult. So what we do is our staff takes time to build trusting relationships with the students and the families to basically ensure that they're comfortable with the program that's put in place, which the parents are also involved in creating. So communication for us occurs on a weekly basis via our social workers that's assigned to each student, and it can happen by email, by phone, based on the parent's preference. And when safe, obviously without COVID, we really enjoy having in-person meetings. We're an open door. So, on top of quarterly progress reports and things like that, I think that we view ourselves as an extension of the family, and it really is one big group effort, which our families really respect and appreciate.
What's your like level of communication with the parents? Do you have sort of like a formalized communication?
Yeah,
You know,
we do. So it's typically every Friday, and parents can choose either email or phone. We do have families that we communicate with daily, and we have families that we communicate with multiple times a day. And if anyone on my team is listening to this webinar, they might look at me and be like, we can't do that for every child, but we do our best to make parents comfortable, especially at the beginning, because we know it's really hard. And then we sort of try and taper a little bit because we want to make sure our teachers are with your child as opposed to on the phone with you every day as well.
wonderful. Kristen, would you like to take that question next?
Very similar to what Lauren said. American School for the Deaf is quite similar. The students arrive. It's very normal for the parents to feel anxiety because they're not sure what the program looks like and they envision certain things and they question themselves if they make the right decision. So we provide support to these parents. We have a clinical team, we have a dean of students, and we encourage the students to call their parents, continue to maintain that contact with the parents until the parents start to feel comfortable. Of course, before COVID, as everyone, the parents were welcome to come and visit campus at any time and do a check-in with their child. Again, and I'm always encouraging the parents to go ahead to have their child bring things, you know, to their room so they can feel like they are a home away from home, things that they make it feel like their home, things that they prefer, whether if it's the younger child, they'll bring a toy, or the older children, something that they find. We review their treatment every 12 weeks. We meet and do the review and we check in on their progress and we make sure that the children are monitored and the parents know. And we want them to be reassured that what they have done is made the right decision.
Wonderful. Christy, you want to take that away?
Yeah. So we work really hard on the front end to help our families feel as informed as possible as they're even in the beginning stages of that admissions process. So, you know, we encourage them to ask questions about our accreditation and to ask questions about, you know, our policies around COVID. That's been a big one this year. And then we have multiple touch points as they're going through that admissions process so that we're gradually easing everybody in and helping everybody build that trust and that comfort level. You know, so maybe just starting with like a quick little tour around school one day and then coming back and having a chance to sample some classes and then ultimately coming back and trying the program on for almost a week. And so throughout that time, you know, we're gathering data and sharing that feedback with the families so that they're getting a sense that like, yeah, we're really getting to know your student. You know, we're not going to have them come here if we don't think that we can serve them well and that they wouldn't be a good fit in our community. And I think that often, you know, builds a lot of trust with the families before they're even enrolled. You know, by the time I hand them that week visit report where I've kind of laid out all the strengths and the needs that we've seen throughout the week and our, you know, considerations and recommendations, they're usually like, oh, wow, yeah, you got it, you know. And then similar, you know, to the other programs, once they're there, our students typically have an initial assessment period. That's like the first 45 days that they're in our program. That's a huge, another data gathering time for us to be able to compare to that beginning assessment that they had prior to admissions. And then formally the team meets at the end of that period to develop goals and objectives, very similar to what families would have seen as part of an IEP process. And then those are formally updated and reviewed every 6 months. And then in addition to that, you know, the case manager, who is the special education teacher, is having weekly communication with the families as well. And sometimes more than weekly, again, you know, it depends on the individual student and the family. I think we do find that the longer the students are with us and the more settled they get, the less frequent that communication, you know, often has to be.
Absolutely. Perfect. I'm getting a lot of questions actually about the outplacement to residential schools and sort of the cost of programs and paying for that. So I guess, you know, I'd like to start this discussion, you know, because now I feel like it's going to take up the rest of the time with if the 3 school representatives on the panel could talk about, you know, and I'm not talking about actual numbers, but, you know, the cost of your programs and the components of those costs and what you're providing, because I think that, you know, my understanding of this is sort of the the tuition piece, there's the residential piece, and then there's the, I guess the medical or the, the therapeutic piece of it. And I want to talk about those things. And then I'd like to wrap in, Larry and Paul to talk about, what have been trends, in outplacement and sort of how that's all working out. And I anticipate this is obviously a multi-part question, but if, Lauren, if you want to start with that again, not to put you on the spot, but.
No, it's okay. It's definitely a loaded question. For us, going into tuition, we have to consider the level of therapeutic support that we are providing. And we do have multiple rates based on multiple program options and then programs as well. So we're not only looking at educating your child, but we're also looking at the level of therapeutic supports that we are able to provide, not only within the IEP, but in the middle of a crisis where we're bringing in a social worker or a mental health clinician to intervene. And we know that children are changing because they should be changing, maybe every day. With regards to outplacement, I would say that, and actually, let me just quickly get back to adding into tuition. We also try and add as many activities both on campus and off campus as we can. So I could talk about all the activities pre-COVID, but we'd go off campus. We try and get them into the community as much as possible. We factor in community-based internships and who's going with those students to those internships during the day as well. With regards to outplacement, I do feel like, Lawrence and Paul are better, better to respond, but just so everyone on the webinar knows, for us, kids come in so many different ways. We do have district placed students, and we also have parentally placed students. It really depends on the situation. I hope that it was a very loaded question, so I hope.
No, I know. I'm sorry.
I want to give it's okay. I want to give everyone else time. So
it has to be asked. So I guess to sort of not summarize what you were saying, but what you're saying is that the pieces of the tuition obviously are going to differ, in terms of the individual student, as the plan is going to differ, and it's going to differ largely based on what level of care you're providing. So it could be, kind of one end, or is that what you're saying? That's kind of what I was getting.
Yeah, so for us, I had mentioned before, we have two programs. Our core program is one cost, and then our founders program is a different cost because that's one-to-one support. So the level of support for a 7-day room and board, there's 3.5 individuals assigned to that one student throughout the year.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. Kristen, would you like to take this question next?
Certainly. Similar to Lauren, we have two programs, our core and our PACES program, and this tuition is different for each. Well, of course, when you're looking at core program, there's much less support, whereas PACES, some require 24-hour care one-on-one, some are 5 days, some are 7 days. So again, depends on the individual need of each student, depending what their IEP is requesting. And we discuss it with the school districts, the LEAs. We want to make sure that the decision is made appropriately of how much and what level of care is needed. We also provide transportation, and that's included into the tuition cost for our students. Again, it depends on what kind of clinician services. We may include speech therapy, OT, PT that was stated. All of that could be included as well, depending on each individual student and their needs.
Christy?
Yeah, so I think at Chapelhaven, our program is a transition program with the intent that you are going to grow and develop the skills and then be able to move forward more independent than when you came to us. And so much in the way when we, go to college and we make that big upfront investment, we know that that is going to give us a yield at the end of that, where that young adult is going to be more independent, is going to be less reliant upon, continued support. So the long run cost of it is going to be, much less. And so I think when we consider the comprehensive nature of the programming, as both Lauren and Kristen have said, the 24/7 staffing, the small student to teacher ratios, that continuous incidental learning that's happening, it really is instruction throughout the day and the evening. I think that tends to make sense for the tuition, in the long run. But I know that it can be difficult and not always accessible for a private pay family, which is why, webinars like this are great to help families understand, what options are.
Absolutely. Larry, do you want to kick us off and talk a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of trends in residential outplacement? I will tell you that from what I'm seeing, I used to never receive applications from families who are looking for residential placement, and now I'm seeing quite a few. This is relative to 3 years ago. And I don't know if there's anything to read from that, but I'm seeing a lot more students that need a real supportive 24-hour type of system. So tell me kind of what you've been seeing in this area, and also I'd love it if you and Paul could kind of pull at the thread of this residential versus educational portion versus medical therapeutic portion, and then just talk a little bit about what your experience has been with what districts are willing to do and not do.
Well, first of all, I practice only in Connecticut, and the rules in New York are different than here in Connecticut. As far as the what you just touched upon, you're seeing a lot more at Self. Well, what's happening? We're dealing with anxiety like on steroids, like we've never seen before. Parents are anxious, the children are anxious, the schools are anxious, and there's a lot of finger pointing without much, solutions. So what's happening is parents are stressed out, their children are stressed out, and they're seeing the grass greener at a therapeutic or just a residential program, because there's no one model. Some have social workers, some have psychiatrists, some have psychologists, some have very strong academics, some are more heavily invested in the therapy. So the trend I'm seeing is the schools are more resistant than ever, in Connecticut at least, because they don't see the educational benefit after the end of the traditional school day. So if they come to the conclusion, the school district come to the conclusion that the student needs an out-of-district placement, typically they're looking at a day program. And that's where the parents, their consultants, psychiatrists, psychologists, who's ever involved in the treating capacity, whoever is evaluating the student, needs to be detailed in explaining the hows and why that a student needs a therapeutic, any residential placement, therapeutic or any other kind of residential placement. As Christy pointed out, Chapelhaven is a residential program, but they're not, quote, therapeutic. So I'm not painting with a broad brush. I'm just saying any residential program. The school districts are risk averse to the residential, the room and board piece. I'm involved with a settlement right now, and the school district wants the parents to aggressively apply for health insurance to offset the costs of a therapeutic residential program. And the health insurance companies will not pay for anything that's considered educational. If it's medical, they will consider paying for it. And so that's another area where the school districts are trying to have the parents use their public or private insurance to offset costs that might otherwise be considered education. Another trend is some school districts that I deal with are trying to offload their educational responsibility onto the Department of Children and Family, the Child Welfare Agency here in Connecticut, or through a memorandum of understanding through the Department of Developmental Services. These are not educational agencies. These are non-educational agencies that will make placements at residential treatment centers, which are not therapeutic schools. And so I'm seeing it in multiple capacities where the schools are trying to limit their exposure by only recommending a day program when the child probably needs a residential program. The school districts are trying to shift their responsibilities so they only have to pay for the educational costs of a residential program and shift the non-educational costs off to state agencies. Health insurance, maybe single digit, 1, 2, 3% of overall costs are covered by health insurance. Medication management, anything provided by an MD might be considered medical, but again, the insurance companies are trying to avoid paying unless it's a pure medical issue. So what I see in placements, school districts are citing extraordinary costs for purchasing PPE equipment. Other tax revenues are down, citing a whole host of reasons why this is not their responsibility. And that's where in Connecticut we call them PPT meetings. New York, it's the CES meetings. It's very important to try to build the case for a residential placement at the PPT meeting here in Connecticut. Parents supported by psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, in some cases just reading back the school records back to the school members of the PPT meeting to show them your own data does not support what's called meaningful educational progress. This all starts with a concept called free appropriate public education. And when we're talking about an out-of-district placement, usually parents have to establish a denial of a free appropriate public education. There's no meaningful progress. Worse, there's regression going on. And the problems are not only at home, because especially today when children are spending a lot of time online with hybrid programs or online learning full time, or like today, schools are open yesterday, they're closed today. Children usually need some kind of stability and predictability. And that's also not happening. It hasn't been happening since the declaration of the COVID-19 health emergency last March. So there's no one trend. I see a lot of
different trends.
I see the trend is schools are risk averse to residential placements or that portion.
Right.
From my perspective, this is why it's important, and I'm not going to tell any private school how to run their program, but when they do break out their costs, and you touched upon this, Christine, what's education, what's residential, what's therapy, or a third or fourth category, I can go to the school district and sometimes we can get most of the non-residential costs paid for, provided that the parents are willing to absorb a portion of the overall costs. And one of the things I wrote down when you were speaking about the costs, I wrote down sticker shock. Mm-hmm. Sticker shock for parents, sticker shock for the school districts. And I want to be very clear, I'm not being the least bit critical of the cost of these programs. They're very expensive. Why? They're very small. They have a lot of services that are not in the school district. They're very small, I mean, in the sense of classroom size, teacher-student ratios, a lot of support after school. Well, that translates to increased costs. School districts in Connecticut like to look at their average per pupil costs, which is just taking a school district budget, dividing it by the number of students and saying that's our average cost. That might be $20,000, $25,000.
Let's hold on that, because I actually want to have a separate discussion about that. Paul, can you kind of weigh in on, on the, what you've seen? I know you have a lot of experience in residential placements, in New York, and really all over. You know, how do you get a district? I mean, I think we've established that, you know, for a lot of these programs, there's a lot of services being provided. You know, there's a lot of, service all over the board. You know, how do you get a district to pay for a residential portion, the residential portion of the tuition, the non-educational portion?
Right. So that just as an initial matter, if a district, if the district is agreeing to place the student through an IEP into a residential program, as Larry said, this is about FAPE, which is, the first word is free. So if a district is placing a student into a residential program, or any school for that matter, it is not at any expense to the family. That is the district bears the cost of that. The issue that comes up more often is the unilateral placement case. The district is either saying that they can meet the student's needs in the district, or they're saying they can meet the student's needs out of district, presumably in a day program. And so, I mean, most settlement agreements, if the parents then unilaterally place into a residential program, most settlement agreements are some sort of cost sharing. And I would concur with everybody on the panel that those are often based upon that three-pronged breakdown. It is, you have the academic piece, you have the therapeutic or medical or clinical piece, and you have the room and board, the residential piece. And there's no doubt that districts will, if they have recommended a day program, that when it comes to negotiations, they'll often start the conversation with, well, the room and board part, that is your responsibility. So what we do, what we argue is that, and this is often the case in residential programs, especially the therapeutic ones, is that the therapeutic piece is built in as part of the room and board, as part of the residential. There are therapeutic components to that aspect of the program. So while that breakout exists, and it often does exist for insurance purposes, we try to argue that we do argue, hopefully successfully, that the therapeutic piece, which it has to be a necessity for the student, is built in throughout the day and at night and on the weekend, and so that you can't break the
separate it. You can't separate it. Exactly. No, I definitely have families where they are like, it's all well and good for my child to have an educational component that ends at 4, but what am I supposed to do about the 6 hours from 4 to 10 when he's not in school and he's banging his head on the wall? Like, I can't do that, therapeutic day program or no, that's just not something that the parent can do. So I think that what you're saying is super helpful in trying to frame like how you talk about the, like, it's not just room and board, it's not like, we're talking about, time at a hotel, it's part and parcel of the therapy that's of the, the remediation that's happening basically.
I think one of the things that's really important is, and one of the things that we feel very comfortable arguing and raising at CSC meetings, PPT meetings, or if we're in a hearing, is that it's not just that it's 24/7 support, it's that you have all of these different people, all these components working together. So if a student has a rough night, put very simplistically, in the residential setting, then the residential team is speaking to the academic team the next day and is able to say, this student had watch him today, watch her today. She had some difficulty. This was a tough night. And that team effort is something that many students really need. And that is, I think, one of the strongest arguments you can make to a district, because it really speaks to how comprehensive a residential program can be and is, and how it's such a team approach to it. And it's not just, well, the student's out of my house, I'm having trouble handling my child here. It's my child needs to be in that program so that full team can work with my child and provide therapy and provide the academic
education during the day, which otherwise they wouldn't be able to. I want my school, representatives to expand on that, and that relationship between, the therapeutic side, the sort of, I'm going to call it the post 4 o'clock team and the school-based team during the day. But I had a question specifically for you, Paul, from a participant. This participant, this person would like to know if you can speak to the process of how residential schools on the New York State, ed list get approved, and how this happens every year, and like, are there efforts to expand the list, expand that list?
So that was for me. I'm sorry.
That was for you. Yeah.
Okay. The list has existed for a long time. The schools that are on there have been there for a long time. If anything, schools have come off the list. I'm not aware of any school that's been added in some time, and most schools, in fact, one prominent school in the city just came off the list. And most private schools have really chosen not really to want to be on the list for a variety of reasons. One is you're dealing with the state and state rates and compliance with IEP. So getting on the list is not something I haven't really seen it happen. I know a few schools have applied, but they weren't successful in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, that's a similar experience here in Connecticut. There are about 80 or so schools on the list of approved private special ed schools, but that list is not expanding. In fact, it might be contracting. It's very expensive for private schools to be on the list, because every 3 or 5 years the State Department of Education does a top to bottom back up to top review. I wish they did that for the public schools, but they only do it for the private special ed schools. In Connecticut, it's very expensive, it's time consuming. And then, as Paul pointed out, some schools just don't want to deal with the state bureaucracy. It's just not worth it. So they are.
I feel like that list has had some additions, at least in the 10 years that like I have been kind of doing this. There's definitely been schools that have been added to that list that were not on the list when I was looking, when my son was when we were first looking, scrolling through that list and looking for alternatives. And other schools have fallen off that list, obviously, because they closed or, for whatever reason. So, it's a stat, but I feel like that list has had some movement, the Pinnacle School, the Spire School, Villa Maria, all those got added to, the list in the last 10 years. Villa didn't used to be on it, and it is now. So I feel like that one's been added. I was wondering if you all on the school panel could talk about, getting back to that idea of, the interplay between the therapeutic staff and the educational staff during the day, particularly with an eye to, talking about how that is a sort of a total milieu kind of, program, a program for us, for a student. Christy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because, though we don't have like that therapeutic piece that we were talking about, but still exact same thing that Paul is talking about is happening. Our speech language pathologists, our special education teachers, they're communicating daily with the life skills instructors who are working with the students in their apartment in the evenings, with the rec staff who are leading activities in the evening, saying, hey, this happened today with so-and-so and so-and-so, here's what we focused on. We want to see this, same language carried through in the activities they're taking part in this evening. And so it is that continuous cycle of using common language, everybody focusing on that same goal, in order to be moving the student forward. And I think an important piece too is learning how to manage some downtime, for our adults is a big thing. And a lot of that happens through structured lessons, to prepare them for how to do that. So in the evenings when life skills instruction is done and you've got some free time, you don't just go and sit in your room and play video games the whole time. You might do that for a little bit because everybody enjoys having some downtime, but you're learning with the support of your teacher and your life skills instructor how to identify peers that you enjoy spending time with, how to pick common activities that you both enjoy, and not just talk to them about your favorite TV show for 30 minutes without asking, them questions about their interest or responding, in back and forth ways. So those social skills are huge and are often part of students' IEPs, but that is often worked on, in those evening hours, in those weekend hours. We have a really comprehensive recreation program that, yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it's also about working on those social skills, those community safety skills.
Yeah.
So I think that is a really important piece. That was well put, Paul.
That's a good point. Kristen, would you like to take this question?
Certainly. We talk about socialization skills. It's so very important because of teaching our students how to communicate with each other. We have a rec program after school. We teach the children how to socialize, not only within a group, but also individually. So the staff is using that opportunity to identify which students prefer to do, which students feel comfortable in socializing, and some don't. And then on the weekend, it's very important to identify what they do in the downtime. Sometimes we have to look, the staff have to decide what are the trigger points for our students. We feel that that's very important regarding their social skills. Our staff and administrative level collaborate together all the time to making sure that each shift knows what's going on, because the goal, again, always is to make sure that our students' needs are met, the socialization skills are met. We want to see them be successful.
Perfect. And can you also, Kristen, talk a little bit about how the, the after hours team, as it were, works with the educational team during the day, and how that, those pieces kind of work together to make sure that, the child has access to the full breadth of the education?
We want to make sure that all shifts, we have some overlapping of shifts between each time change. So they have Western communication happens. We have a team meeting. We have the 12-week reviews. And we make sure we have a PBIS, a positive behavior intervention support program that we use. We also have Swiss program with data is put in all the time. That's reviewed. We review it together so each shift knows what has occurred with each child and what the child needs in particular time or during the school day, transferring over into the dorm life afterwards. So I think it's very important that we have that overlap of the staff from first shift to second, et cetera, and even the weekends, to make sure that the communication is shared about the child before the next shift starts and takes over.
Perfect. And Lauren, I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about the interplay between, the therapeutic staff and the, and your teachers during the day, and how they work together in, in a seamless way to help the child learn.
Sure. So for us, we are on our third academic year, and I've been there since the very beginning. And the biggest thing for us when building our program was being transdisciplinary. And we went crazy with that. We went into furniture and, pulling apart pieces, putting things back together. But for us, it's really about having every student assigned a team, and that team meeting at the end of every day. And there's clinicians on the team, there's folks from education. If you live with us, there's folks from campus life, and we have transdisciplinary notifications. I get probably 50 to 100 a day, just so that there's overlap, and it goes through everything, whether someone didn't sleep, someone didn't eat dinner, someone didn't do their homework, so that every single person, including security, myself and admissions, can know if there's a new behavioral plan put in place, and that we can adhere to it as well. So on top of that, we have, the meetings at the end of every day. If there's a bigger issue, we're meeting with the family, we're meeting, and all of the team players, including myself and security, we're meeting with the attorneys and consultants, and we really loop everybody in, because we feel like the more people in it, the better and quicker the gains. It really is one big team effort to make these students progress, and we want to make sure that we are just in that constant communication. So I sort of, I'm piggybacking on obviously what the other program said, but we do all of that as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. I think it's, if I had to summarize, just thinking about your programs and in those three pieces, in those three different cost buckets is probably not, super helpful for, for families, and, more to present it as like, as a more holistic educational effort, I think might be, the way to go in terms of, dealing with this vis-a-vis, your school district and the school district paying for it and, whatever else. I had a question actually from the audience. What are you seeing with the recent pre-COVID situation with over year-long wait lists because there are not enough places for 21-year-olds to age out to? What should kids and families who are waiting do in the meantime? Larry, do you want to take that?
That's an excellent question that doesn't have an easy answer. So I'm not trying to avoid it. We can't, we're dealing with CDC guidelines and some schools have reduced their admission. We can't make more seats or beds or programs available. The only hope I have is people in the know are seeing, in effect, a market to add more schools to the mix, more programs to the mix. Costs a lot of money. It's happening haphazardly, but it is happening around the country. There are programs expanding. Keep knocking on the door, keep finding out where your son or daughter is on a waiting list, keep, don't give up hope, just keep pursuing, that's all we can do. In Connecticut, right now, we have our General Assembly, that's the state legislature, in session. I've been encouraging all of my clients to contact their elected officials as this state budget is being put together. Down in Washington, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut is sponsoring legislation to expand funding for special education. I urge my clients to contact their elected officials in Washington as the next round of COVID-19 economic stimulus, which does have a significant piece for special education on the drawing board. We want to get that in reality, because a lot of what we're talking about is money, whether it's private money, school district money, insurance. And as the pie is expanding, there's more money to help families that we're talking about with out-of-district placements. School districts, I have several school districts are just citing the over expenditures on PPT equipment, not in the budget, so I can't help you. Or I can't help you this year the way I could last year because I don't have the money. So it's important that parents be involved with the political process with a small p, that is, going to the Board of Education meetings, talking about the local school budget, going to the state legislature, expanding the pie at the state level, going down to Washington and contacting their elected officials. Congress promised 40% federal funding back in 1975. After 30 plus years of special education on the federal level, we're at probably 15 cents, maybe 16 cents on the dollar. A lot of problems have solutions if Congress met their responsibility with funding.
Right. Paul, do you have thoughts on on this idea or this situation with the over year-long waiting list because there's not enough places for a 21-year-old to age out to? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so I very much agree with what Larry just said. I mean, it's a problem really without answers. The only thing I would add is, Larry mentioned knocking on the door, checking on the wait list. If there's an urgent situation, if there's an emergent need for residential, then I make sure that you're constantly contacting whoever your point of contact is, whether it's a caseworker or the state, and letting them know if you need to move up, and because there can be emergency placements, there can be urgent placements, and so that would be the one thing. But as far as the list goes, I mean, certainly it's gotten worse over the last, since this all happened over the last 11 months, but there's if there's any expansion, it's limited. And I mean, again, I don't want to avoid answering the question here, but it's a question without an answer, unfortunately. I mean,
Yeah.
really, truly.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to. I mean, I could be wrong, but is there any like sort of emergency funding, that can address a situation like that, or not really?
I mean, I think I'm not aware of any. I think the bigger problem is there's no room.
Right.
There are no facilities.
Right. There's no capacity. So the funding almost doesn't matter, if the places don't exist, particularly, in a kind of post COVID world. We're sort of like on this theme of funding. I wanted to talk a little bit about, excess cost sharing, because it's sort of like, relates to funding for, for programs like these. I have actually heard some school boards who are, excited by, I wouldn't say excited, that's not the right word, but who are hopeful about the prospect of new special education funding and the ability to apply that to this excess cost formula, which I think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, is like 4.5 times the per pupil, cost in Connecticut. Is that right, Larry? Am I getting that right?
That's what it is on paper. In the old days, the school districts would get 100 cents on the dollar above excess costs. I think it's around 60, 70 cents on the dollar today. The funding formula is being tinkered with based upon available appropriations. That's the statute.
So just so that people understand, can you explain what I'm talking about, just so that people understand?
Just keep it simple. If the average per pupil cost is $10,000, the school districts have, and let's say the private school costs $100,000. So the school district pays $100,000 and they apply for excess costs. In my example, anything over $45,000, the school district should get some, if not all of that difference. That's how the funding formula works here in Connecticut. The problem is the parents are not part of that process. It's bilateral between the school district and the State Department of Education. The parents or the child are indirect beneficiaries, but the negotiations are between the school district, the local school district, and the State Department of Education. So that's why growing the pie,
growing the pie is important,
available.
So I think it's interesting because, some of the school districts that I, know are talking about this, it doesn't really, I think, relate to, your typical day program, because most of them are not at a level where, after 4.5 times they would get anything back, you know what I mean? But it does matter for a residential program that is, on a combined basis, you're talking about, a very large number that, where you would, be able to get a significant recovery for the school district that is, that might make it more feasible for residential placements to happen. I'm just speculating. Paul, what is your, observation on that?
So, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but the formula is very similar in New York and in New Jersey, for that matter. And I mean, it's diminished over the years what they're actually getting back. It actually makes it complicates settlements sometimes, because one of the big issues is that districts will look at it and they'll say, well, what's it costing us? What would it cost us to place a student out of district? And then the family unilaterally places, and then we're negotiating. Well, you would have cost you this much anyway. So there's one sort of negative about this, which is if the programs are starting to cost the districts less, then they're going to settle for less also on a unilateral placement case.
Right. Okay.
Is that and I'm sure Larry has the same experience as me. I can never get a straight answer from the board of attorneys on it. And some of it is because they don't know all the time. But when we say, well, how much would it have cost you to place at this state approved program? And they said, we don't know.
Right.
Well, $40,000 to settle the case, and it's like, well, it might have cost you $70,000. But I do think that look, anything that is allows them, districts to have more money, and that they would be more encouraged then to place. And I agree with you, it would be more about residential than day because of the cost difference. Anything that encourages them to be more open to placing students in a residential program and not always making this the
distinction between
I think is a
boarding
falsely
and, whatever.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it just, if it becomes something that's more feasible from a budgetary perspective from them, they're getting money, then, I mean, I could actually see why districts would be in favor of this and would be excited for those funds, because I think that they are, because of, well, not just COVID related, but just budget problems in general, have been reluctant to place in residential or out of district program and day programs.
Right.
This will allow them to do so if that money comes through. I mean, hopefully it will.
Wonderful. Well, I think we are running up on the end of our time in this panel. I really wanted to give, actually what I'd like to do is give the three school representatives a chance to to say a few words at the conclusion of this. And then Larry and Paul, you can kind of weigh in on what your thoughts are on on residential placement, residential schools after they've all gone. Christy, would you like to say a few words to summarize?
Sure. Just in terms of like, why do residential?
Yeah, exactly.
Do it. It's great. No. Yeah. I mean,
things that you could never learn in your parents' house.
That really is true. I mean, it really is true. It's helping these young adults take that little step out, but, having that safety net that's underneath them and, helping them to feel good about that and feel empowered by that, and gaining their self-confidence. I think we see a lot of our adults come to us not having a lot of self-confidence. And sometimes it's just because they haven't really had the opportunity to put that into practice, and to come to realize their own skills. And so to see that happen is just fantastic. And to see the social bonds that are formed in the community. I mean, honestly, I think that is the reason that we've got a graduate community of like 150 adults, is because they have created such a tight network with each other that they don't want to leave that, and they don't want to have to take a step back by going back home and living with mom and dad when they've had that taste of what it's like to be out there doing it on their own. Westville's such a wonderful community because there's so much they can access independently without having to rely, on anyone. And so it's just, I mean, it's really a fantastic thing. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for the opportunity to share in this tonight.
Well, thank you for joining us. Kristen, would you like to share some words, some thoughts?
Students are always learning in the classroom. That's very true, but most learning occurs outside of the classroom through life experiences, through community-based developed activities, through friendships. They learn socialization skills. And I see major improvements in their self-esteem and their independence. Very often when they're home with parents, the parents don't know what to do with them. They feel they become overprotective towards our students. They're not sure what to do. But in a residential program, what happens, the staff are trained in those particular areas, of course. It's their expertise to help the children learn how to thrive independently. So I think it's just great for the students to have that residential experience.
Wonderful, thank you. And Lauren?
I mean, just to echo the other programs, I completely agree. I think that, students do progress, and they progress socially just by leaps and bounds when they are in a residential setting. They have confidence, they're proud of themselves, they have friendships, and these are things that we see during our day program, but we really see exceed our expectations during our residential, our hours, because they're choosing activities that they want to be a part of, not that maybe mom and dad want them to be a part of. So they're really in charge of their future in a way, and I think that's really exciting. And yes, thank you for allowing us to be a part of this. I think it's really great to give all of the information. So.
Paul, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, this is like, you could have an entire webinar on, the process of residential outplacement, I think. And you could talk for a full hour on that. But, insofar as, you and I have explored in a previous panel, kind of the process of, outplacement, how do you, how would you modify that process for a residential placement? And particularly with an eye to, how do you get the district to recognize that, that residential piece?
So it could be an hour-long discussion at least, but it's what's really important to do is if a family is starting to think about a residential program, if there are if part of the student's team is starting to, saying the private team is thinking about residential, you need to start having that discussion early before you've made the decision, and you need to document that. You need to make sure that districts don't like it when it's a sudden move and there's a sudden notice of unilateral placement letter, especially when we're talking about a residential program. So you have to build the case. And how do you do that, right? So you need to speak, you need to document everything that's going on, but then also you need to get that expert support. So especially if you're talking about a therapeutic program, the student's therapist, the psychiatrist, and then ultimately a neuropsychological evaluation is key. And there are great options in Connecticut and Westchester, obviously. And I think the most important thing I can say is that no matter what stage of the process you're at, it's very important for the families to not say that they're looking for what's best for their child or what's better for their child, or they're looking to maximize the child's potential.
Don't use maximize.
Don't anything like that.
It's not best.
And this is key in unilateral placement cases, but it's especially important in residential. It's that the child needs or requires residential. The child needs that team approach. That child needs the 24/7 support in order to either access education or to make meaningful progress.
Right.
And so from a very early stage in the process, when you're starting to think about it, you need to start using those types of terms, and you need to get experts involved as quickly as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. Larry, any final thoughts on that?
Guys, I could not have said it better. Just to expand on what Paul said, is parents need to know their rights. And it's not only the procedural safeguards, which in Connecticut often don't explain to parents that they have to give written notice of their intent to make unilateral placement. It's not in there. So talking to a lawyer,
10 days.
Experts in the field, talking to, coming to seminars and webinars like this one, where you can learn from people who do this every single day, so you as parents can do this every single day, is important. We are in what's called the Second Circuit Court of Appeals that covers New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. We have some excellent case law, judge-made decisions covering residential placements and when a school district is or is not responsible for the entire costs. So understanding what's educational, what's non-educational is important. So it comes back to that free appropriate public education and a denial of a free appropriate public education, lining up experts. And I also add the parents to that list of experts. They know their child best. They see their child in multiple settings, not just school or some other setting. Getting reports, evaluation, whether it's psychiatric, neuropsychological, whatever is going to support you as the parent's decision to pursue an out-of-district placement, and making that case at a PPT meeting, a CSE meeting in New York, and ultimately being prepared to act on your request if it's denied. Hopefully the CES or the CSC, I'm sorry, CES is a school, I'm sorry, CSC in New York, and the PPT will see the benefit of an out-of-district residential placement. But if not, parents have to line up their experts and be prepared to pursue that request. And as Paul pointed out, there are settlement agreements where there's a sharing of costs. That's one way. Going to a due process hearing is another way. The best way, obviously, is to have a PPT make that placement decision, but that doesn't happen too often. And the most important thing I can say is parents need to know their rights and know how to access those rights. And that's through webinars like tonight, going on the internet, seeing what's out there, reading your procedural safeguards, talking to advocates and attorneys and other experts in the field. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of non-information out there, and parents often find out after the fact. I mean, I had a client a couple of years ago say, where in the procedural safeguards was I supposed to provide written notice to the school district? I said, it's not there. How am I supposed to know? I said, now you know, you spoke to me, and I will take care of that for you, but prospectively as opposed to relatively. So.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for this webinar. Thank you to all of our panel participants. This webinar was recorded. It will be available on our Facebook page and on our Vimeo page, and I will send that around to anyone who missed a portion of this presentation, and also to anyone who participated in the panel and would like to see the recording as well. That'll be available not tomorrow, but someday later this week. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.